Hello and welcome back to English from the North, the podcast for English learners of an intermediate to advanced level, bringing you the English language as it's spoken naturally, with, of course, a Scottish twist. Once more, my name's Lewis, and welcome to the podcast. In this episode, we're going to be having a look at my adventures with learning Spanish and everything kind of associated with that, the learning methods, all that kind of stuff. The link to the transcript is in the description below if you need them, if you want to read along with this episode. You can also send me an email if you've got any questions, comments, anything you'd like to say, anything you'd like to ask. Feel free to send me an email. So, let's get started then. So my story with learning Spanish basically starts in May of 2021. Learning Spanish properly, that is. In the previous episode, I kind of talked about how my family have a lot of kind of deep connections with Spain, how we'd always kind of gone on holiday. I'd been on holiday to Spain, I think, 9 times before I went to Madrid, before I moved to Madrid for work as an English teacher in September, October of 2021. But my Spanish never really progressed beyond sort of touristy basics, hello, how are you, the bill please, good evening, good afternoon, and bye, that kind of stuff, the absolute basics, because my parents kind of always had this approach of, even though we don't speak the language, we should kind of learn the basics, just at the very least be polite. And I think that's a good rule to stick to, regardless of whatever country you go on holiday to. If you go on holiday to another country where they don't speak your language, you should at the very least try and learn some basics, just to be polite and all that kind of stuff. But never really knew much more than that. I'd learned languages a little bit in school. I say languages, German was the one I had to do. We had to, or at least when I was at school, it was obligatory from about 10 years old until 14. So I'm going to have a look at sort of the education system in Scotland in the future. But basically we have two sort of schools. It's divided into two schools, primary school and secondary school. Primary school goes from primary 1, about 5 years old, to primary 7, about 12 years old, and then secondary school is first year to 6th year, so 12 to 18 basically. And it was obligatory, at least when I was at school, to study a modern language, and it was usually either French or German, or in some schools just French, from 10 until 14 when you did your first exam, which was your standard grade exam. So I studied German. It was in school. It wasn't very good, in a class with like 30 people, lots of grammar rules, all that kind of stuff, and I didn't really learn much of it. I technically have the equivalent of an A in standard grade German, but really, to use a saying in English, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It doesn't mean anything. I can't speak German. I can say, like, again, the touristy basics, and that's about it. Not much to show for after 6 years. So I didn't really have much sort of experience with speaking a language or anything like that. So when I started to learn Spanish in May of 2021, because I was going to Spain, going to live in Madrid, I sort of started with what I knew from school, which was writing down all the conjugations of the verb in a textbook, studying from a textbook, trying all these different apps, taking group classes. That the company that I was going out to work for originally provided classes. It was classes in a group with a very lovely but very disorganized lady from Venezuela, who was, again, like I say, very, very lovely, but she was a bit all over the place. The lessons were a bit chaotic. And that was kind of when I realized that group classes didn't really work for me, but we can cover that in a bit. So what other resources did I use? Well, I sort of used a little bit of everything. I tried, SpanishDictionary.com, tried their paid service, SpanishPod 101, Pimsleur, Busuu, Duolingo. Of course, I think everybody tries Duolingo. All these kinds of applications, all these different things. It was sort of a bit all over the place. And so my routine for the first sort of 6 or 7 months from May of 2021 through to sort of November, December time was kind of using a sort of mixture of these apps, these group classes that didn't really work for me because I didn't really get much opportunity, I felt, at least, to talk and all that kind of stuff. I ended up coming home from Spain just because of like visa problems and the pandemic and COVID, all this kind of stuff. So it was December 2021 I moved back to Scotland. And the start of 2022, I didn't really do anything for the first 3 months, January, February, March. However, I did look and I saw that the Scottish Government was offering money for people aged 25 or younger, which I was at the time, to pick up a new skill. And so I thought, well, I'll apply, see about Spanish, because I'm teaching English to Spanish people. I want to be able to speak the language so that I can maybe help them to better understand. I can better understand them, and that'll help me to help them to better understand English. A bit of a roundabout phrase there. Help me to help them to help me. But basically, the idea was if I learnt Spanish, it would maybe help me to understand where they were coming from. And if there were any problems, I would maybe be able to solve them. So applied for this money, got essentially classes paid for a year, which was very nice. And I started studying properly with a tutor, a man called Raoul, and we've been taking classes together for almost 2 years now. And that was in March 2022. I had a couple of lessons with him, and then I went on holiday to Malaga. Well, I went on holiday back to Spain, had to tie up some things in Madrid, and I decided to go down to Malaga because I'd never really been to Malaga properly before. And I was in Madrid for a few days, and then got on the plane to Malaga. And something kind of clicked in me when I was on the plane down to Malaga, and I thought, right, I'm not going to speak a word of English until I get back on the plane to head back to Madrid. I'm here for 3 days. I'm not going to breathe a word of English. I'm only going to speak Spanish. And at that point, I had a level of about A2. Okay, it wasn't particularly high. However, I then went to Malaga and I was able to communicate with people, and I forced myself to communicate only in Spanish, and it worked. I had very basic conversations, but I was still able to have all these conversations, was still able to talk to all these people. And I remember getting back on the plane and feeling really proud of myself, because I was like, wow, this is the first time that I was able to, for several days, not speak English, not speak my native language. And that really kind of, we would say, lit a fire under me. It really gave me the energy to want to keep doing it. So I came back from holiday, and that was April 2022, and I'd heard people talking about this thing called Dreaming Spanish, and didn't really know what it was about. Just kept seeing it mentioned. Oh, Dreaming Spanish, you need to try Dreaming Spanish, it's great. So I looked up the website, and it was this guy, Pablo, and these other people making these videos. And that was my first introduction to the world of comprehensible input. Now, for those of you that don't know what comprehensible input is, I'm going to make a longer episode on that. But essentially, comprehensible input is providing materials, whether it's a story or a video or a podcast, at a level that is, well, comprehensible, that is to say, understandable. And you can start it from the very beginning. It might sound a bit strange, but you can. Of course, very beginner, absolute beginner comprehensible input is going to be spoken very slowly, like this, with lots of intonation, lots of pictures and things to help you. If you want a good example of that, in French, there's a woman called Alice Ayel. She has her own YouTube channel, her own website as well, where she does that. I used it for my French and it was amazing. If you only have to have one resource to help you learn French, I would 100% recommend that. It is a fantastic, really, really well done resource. She is a big advocate for comprehensible input, and she does a fantastic job. So I started doing Dreaming Spanish for about half an hour a day. I was doing other app stuff as well, Busuu and all this kind of stuff. And then it got to about June time, and I thought, well, I'm listening, I'm going to try reading. And I went down to my local bookstore. There's a chain of bookstores in the UK here called Waterstones. Went down to my local Waterstones and I bought a copy of a book called Short Stories in Simple Spanish by a man called Ollie Richards, who, if you're not familiar with Ollie Richards, is the person who created the story learning method. And I remember this because I remember picking up the book, which was at about a sort of A2 to B1 level, all in Spanish, went back home, sat down, read it, and read the first chapter, and I was like, oh my god, I've just read a chapter of a book. It was only 6 pages, but it doesn't matter. It was still, a chapter all the same. I've just read the first chapter of a book in a different language. I've never done that before. I've been able to read it, and I've been able to understand basically 90% of the story. Okay, I was able to understand what was going on. There were some unfamiliar words, but obviously they're going to be, you're learning. But that was my first, introduction to reading in a foreign language, and that really, really, we've said lit a fire under me. This one really fired me up. There's another expression for really gave me the energy to want to keep going. So I looked up his resources. I looked up his programs online because he has all these courses online. And I bought his Story Learning Uncovered intermediate course because I was at about this intermediate level. And I bought another one called Grammar Hero, which is basically like teaching some principles of Spanish grammar through stories. And I completed them and I absolutely loved them. I bought some other stuff from him as well, podcasts that he'd done, short conversational podcasts. And very quickly, my routine changed from all these apps, looking at rules of grammar and stuff like that, to being more about consuming content, consuming stories, consuming audios, consuming all these videos that people had made, talking about all this sort of random stuff. Could be anything, any everyday stuff, their daily routine, what they like to do at the weekend, all this kind of thing. And that really, really turbocharged my learning. And basically, it's to do with kind of like two principles. When we talk about this material, you can use material, we say extensively or intensively. And when it's extensively, essentially what that means is you just consume as much as you possibly can, okay? As big a volume as you possibly can. You don't listen to it over and over and over again. You just consume as much as you can, and that's what Pablo in Dreaming Spanish recommends. On the other hand, and like with the books, you read the story a couple of times, the Ollie Richard method for the books. You read the story. It's a short story. You read it. You don't focus on every single word that you don't know. He does recommend reading it a couple of times because it's a short story, so he does say, read the same chapter a couple of times. But the point is, you're not focusing on every single thing you don't understand. You're just consuming the material and enjoying the material. So those two have slightly different approaches, but it's the same kind of theme. It's the same kind of idea of you're consuming and just enjoying the material without focusing on the unknown. On the other hand, you have intensive reading and listening. And what that is that's reading and listening something that's very short, and you go through and you focus on every single word that you don't know, and you underline them, you make a list, and then you make flashcards. And that's something that I've done as well, kind of combined the two of them. And that has its uses. Where that's more useful is for sort of more unusual language. Because with extensive reading and extensive listening, if you read and listen a lot, you're going to encounter a lot of the most common words, the sort of 1,000 most common words or the 2,000 most common words. And that you're going to just memorize them by the fact that, oh, there's that word again. And it comes up a lot and you memorize it like that. However, that's not always the case. To use an example in English, words like sort of moreover, nevertheless, these kinds of words like that, you're not going to really hear them in everyday speech. So if you're sort of reading an article and you come across those words, then you would, highlight that word, you'd take it, you'd put it in a sentence in the flashcards, put it in context, and learn it that way using an application like Anki. Anki's a fantastic application, and that was something I started doing in about sort of September, October time, making Anki flashcards from my Spanish lessons. And yeah, talking about flashcards, like I said, context is key. So when you're making flashcards, and this would be my advice for using flashcards, is get the word that you don't know, put it in a sentence so it has context, because it's much easier to remember the context than to remember an individual word. And then have the flashcards with your native language on the front, and basically you need to type the answer in English. I do it sort of in Spanish, so I've got the sentence in English and I need to type it in Spanish, but that's how I do my flashcards. So I was doing that, and that's kind of how my method has stayed the same ever since with Spanish. I watch videos on YouTube, I listen to podcasts that I talked about in the previous episode, watch movies, read books, all this kind of stuff. The good thing with comprehensible input is that eventually it gets to a point, and as you raise up the levels, you go from sort of lower intermediate to upper intermediate to advanced, you can start to consume more native content. So my Spanish right now, after almost 3 years of studying, is at about a C1 level. It's about an advanced level. And I read and listen to native content. It's great. I also listen to other podcasts, the learner podcasts, because there's always something to be learned. But these are podcasts that are spoken in like a natural, fluent way, like my podcast is. And I think that's, you know, it's super important to get the language as it's spoken. But that's what I do sort of now, reading and listening. Apart from that, I also have lessons. So I have 2 hours with Raul every Saturday. I have 2 hours a week with a girl from Argentina called Luna, who has made a Spanish podcast, Español desde el Sur, that I mentioned in the other podcast. I have, or the other episode, I should say. I have another lesson right now to prepare for the exam, the DELI, the sort of official exam to get an official level of B2, C1, whatever. I'm preparing for the C1 with another girl called Martina from Spain as well. So I have hers on Friday. So that's like 5.5 hours of Spanish lessons every week, which is pretty good. But you know, I enjoy it. It's not a chore for me. I think that's the good thing with languages, is once you get past the point, it stops feeling... Well, the whole goal with comprehensible input is that it doesn't feel like a chore to begin with. It's fun. And that's the most important thing, is that the materials that you're consuming, the materials that you're listening to, you're reading, are fun, so that your process of learning is fun, and you're having a good time. Because as soon as it starts getting into the, oh no, I have to study, or oh, I have to do English, or oh, I have to do Spanish, then you don't want to do it, and you start to resent it. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be fun, because you're learning a new language, you're getting the ability to communicate with all these other people across the world, and it should be something fun. It should be something enjoyable, so you can go, oh great, I'm studying English there. Oh great, I'm gonna watch a video in a different language, and I feel so motivated to do it, because the motivation is key. So it really should be fun. The materials that you choose should be fun. And eventually the great thing is once you get more and more advanced, you can start to consume native level content, and it stays fun, it stays enjoyable, and that's what I do now. So that's why I find it so easy to have all these lessons, because at my level they're more like conversation. Well, they are conversations. It literally is us just talking about various different things. The exam preparation classes, obviously we do exam tasks. I do exam tasks with Martina, but with Luna, with Raul, we chat about all sorts of different things, and it's great fun. And with these kinds of conversations, very quickly these people, these individuals, they stop being teachers and start becoming friends. And I think that's the great thing about this, is that I've met so many people that at the start would have said they're a teacher of Spanish, but now they're kind of friends that I meet up with online 2 hours a week to have a conversation with. And I think that's great, because it keeps the process fun, it keeps the process relaxed. And as a teacher, it's the kind of atmosphere and relationship I like to have in my own classes. I like to keep things fun, I like to keep things relaxed, because that's how you stay motivated. So I think that just about covers everything to do with the learning Spanish. So in summary, started off a bit of a mixture of all sorts, and then over the last kind of 2 years, I really sort of discovered this comprehensible input, this sort of extensive reading, extensive listening, and also intensive reading, intensive listening, making flashcards and all that kind of stuff. So I hope that some of this advice proved useful. In the next episode, we are going to have a look at French, although spoiler, it's a lot of the same story, because I was able to really refine my methods for French and do much the same thing. But yeah, we'll have a look at that all the same. So thanks again for listening. Remember, any questions, feel free to send me an email. Check out the transcript in the description below, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.